So you just got rich. Maybe you bought GameStop at $5 or Bitcoin at $1,000. Maybe you did it the good old-fashioned way and won the lottery. But by one means or another, you have found yourself with millions of dollars looking back at you when you open up your bank account. Congratulations, you've won capitalism. Now what? You might have thought that making the money was the hard part, but in many ways, holding on to it can be even harder. Friends you haven't heard from in years will suddenly spring back into your life, strangers will send you threatening letters, and even family members will have a sob story about why they suddenly need money. And ironically enough, multi-million-dollar windfalls from inheritances, gambling, or gambling in denial investing actually increases the likelihood of being declared bankrupt by over 1,000%. So hang on to your lucky windfall and stick around to learn how money works. And if we end up securing your fortunes for many generations to come, make sure to give us a like and subscribe. To understand what to do with your newfound fortune, you have to start off by understanding what not to do. Believe it or not, coming into life-changing amounts of money in a short period of time can inflict upon people what psychologists call sudden wealth syndrome. And while that might sound like the best mental health problem to have, it is still a serious problem. According to the American psychologist Dr. Stephen Goldbart, the symptoms of this affliction include anxiety, isolation, and paranoia, brought about by the perceived guilt of receiving money that wasn't earned. It's kind of like the imposter syndrome turned up to 11. Now, this study was specifically conducted on lottery winners, but the same effects can be seen on most individuals that come into wealth quickly, whether they earned it or not. It's easy to see why a lottery winner might feel a bit uncomfortable about their newfound fortune, but at the other end of the spectrum, successful entrepreneurs that sell off their business can often fall into the same mental trap and suffer the same consequences. This is where the three major threats to your wealth come into play. They are in order from most dangerous to least dangerous: gambling, getting sued, and conspicuous consumption. Gambling is ironically the biggest threat to overnight fortunes. This might sound dumb to onlookers. After all, you just made a crazy amount of money. Why are you trying to make more in such a silly way? But this strange pastime of overnight millionaires is partially because of selection bias. Just think, the types of people who make tens of millions of dollars within a short period of time, by their nature, tend to be risk takers. These risks could be anything like buying an irresponsible amount of lottery tickets, loading up your entire net worth into a failing company, or simply choosing to start a business in an up-and-coming field rather than becoming a good little employee with a stable salary and health insurance. The one problem with gambling here, though, is that it's limitlessly scalable. You might actually be surprised how hard it is to spend the quantities of money we're talking about here. Just think, if you had $100 million and only 24 hours to spend it, what would you do? Buying houses, planes, cars, and mega yachts actually takes a fair bit of work. There's a lengthy transaction process involved in all of these, plus they tend to actually maintain their value. If you spend your $100 million on a mansion, you're not broke, you've just shifted your assets from cash to real estate. However, take that $100 million to Vegas and play hard over a weekend, and you will lose it. The highest limit blackjack table open to the public in the city is at Caesars, with a cap of $500,000 per hand. Assuming you play perfect basic strategy over a day and you have a dealer that offers 50 hands an hour, you would expect to lose $1 million every 60 minutes. Now, of course, you might win, but you also might lose a lot more than this perfect little statistical assumption as well. What's more is that if you are playing a normal game and betting $500,000 a hand, I bet you that just one click of the like button, you would be offered a private table where you could bet just as much as your little heart desired. So yeah, gambling is a big no-no. You have made your money with good fortune. Don't push your luck. The next big no-no is getting sued. Unfortunately, if you become a high-profile overnight millionaire, you've become a high-profile target for litigious individuals. This can range anywhere from ex-business partners to ex-wives. Now, you do have one advantage here, which is that you can, of course, afford good lawyers. But unfortunately, they might end up doing more harm than good. At the $2,500 an hour that top law firms charge, you might end up paying out more in legal fees than you do in settlements. Finally, there is overconsumption. Now, you might have thought this was the biggest trap people fall into. After all, there are a lot of expensive things out there. But as we alluded to earlier, it's actually really hard to spend money at this scale. A German billionaire once lamented that money gravitates to those with money. If he bought a limited edition Ferrari, it wouldn't depreciate in value like most cars. It would actually demand a premium year on year amongst collectors. He purchased multiple holiday homes and they all appreciated in value. His jets got written off as business expenses, and his super yacht ended up turning a profit running charter guests while he was not on board. Oh, and by the way, you can actually basically Airbnb yachts like this one off charter brokerages. This particular example will set you back about $500,000 per week, which does go to show you can still consume your way to being broke, though you really need to put a lot of effort into it. You can't buy things. You need to buy experiences that don't retain any value after they're experienced. Well, apart from a fulfilled life and all. So yeah, avoid these 3 traps and your wealth should serve you for generations to come. But maybe that is easier said than done. And now that we truly understand what not to do, it's finally time to actually lay out a game plan for unexpected millions, which is totally for entertainment purposes only, so don't sue me, mystery internet millionaire. Anyway, step number 1. Don't f***ing open your stupid f***ing mouth and tell any motherfucker anything about any f***ing thing. Alright? In all seriousness though, keep everything as low profile as possible, at least until such a time as you have finished everything else on this list. If you're a lottery winner, stay anonymous. If your lottery doesn't allow for anonymous winners, get a lawyer to pick it up on your behalf. If they don't even allow that, do what the still mysterious A. Campbell did and mask up to collect your prize. Somewhat easier to pull off these days, so you're in luck. If you have made your money through a more conventional means like gambling on Robinhood rather than on your state lottery, then try to avoid bragging about massive gains to your friends and family. Bragging anonymously on the internet is actually fine, so long as you are confident nobody will take you seriously and/or trace the account back to you. Step 1 ensures that you don't invite all the nasty attention that will draw you into these 3 traps. Step 2 is to get good legal assistance. There are actually law firms that specialize in things like lottery winnings, and they have decades of expertise in setting up systems to ensure that you and your money are protected legally, which leads us on to step 3, protect your assets. Set up a company and trust structures that legally separates you from your money. The reason why you hear rich people talking about trust funds so much is for precisely this reason. Trusts are legal entities that can hold assets, like a pile of cash, let's say. Or they can be more complex and hold assets, like shares in a company, which in turn holds a pile of cash. This is likely what the lawyers in step 2 will recommend. This type of trust will have 2 important people: the trustee, who decides what the trust fund does, and the beneficiary, which is the person who gets paid the money from the trust fund. Oh, and by the way, these 2 people can be the same person. And that person can be you. What this means is that if you get sued, you can just say, "Oh well, I don't have any money." "Oh, that over there? You mean the trust that owns a company that has millions of dollars sitting in it? Well, I don't own that. I just control it and benefit from it. Hehe." Now, you might ask, why would you add a company on top of this trust fund? And that's a great question. Trust funds are awesome, but they can't hold on to cash for very long. They are legally required to disperse a large percentage of their cash every year to their beneficiaries. This is to prevent the trustees, the people that actually make the decision in the trust, from holding out on giving the beneficiaries any money. Wouldn't want the trust fund babies missing out on their 3rd trip to Aspen this winter, would we? The problem with this rule for you though is that it means at the end of the year, you would have to pay out a good chunk of that lovely trust fund money and you would be right back where you started, holding onto a big pile of money that could be sued right off you. Whereas, if you give all that money to a company that just so happens to be owned by the trust, then the company can decide if it's going to pay dividends this year, and if so, how much. That then gets given to the trust, which then gets given to you to not gamble with. Congratulations, you are now getting paid like every rich person ever, and you got to learn how trust funds work along the way. Now step 4 is actually putting that money to good use. Money loses its value over time thanks to inflation, and if your money is not making more money, then you will eventually spend it all, even if it does take a lot of time. So, go find some good investments. Nothing too crazy. Remember, you're here to preserve the money, not double it overnight. That no gambling rule applies to the stock market as well. Step 5 is setting up a budget where you can live indefinitely off these investment returns. The conventional wisdom on this is that this budget should be anywhere between 2 to 5% of your total invested assets. Economics Explained did a video on the financial independence movement that established these rules last year, and I will leave a link to that video which describes this investing rule in much more detail. And finally, step 6. Find a new place to call home. We have covered nationless elites on this channel before, and now it's your turn to become one. You need to pick and choose a country that will offer you a good quality of life without infringing any of those nasty taxes upon you. Popular choices amongst so-called financially independent nomads, or global elites depending on who you ask, include Monaco, Liechtenstein, Singapore, the Bahamas, and Bermuda. And don't worry if these nations sound a little bit cramped to you. You only need to live there for 6 months and 1 day out of the year to avoid those taxes, and then you are free to travel around the world with your money, which is now safe, productive, and practically limitless. Now, I'm assuming for most of you watching that the real step one would actually be making $1 million. And a great way to do that is starting a company. Look at people like Steve Jobs, who made billions in his lifetime after founding the most valuable company to ever exist. Although his billions were not actually made from that company. To learn about the company that really made Steve Jobs a billionaire, go and watch our video on the topic. And while you're at it, please consider liking and subscribing to keep on learning how money works.